Hi, my name is Maddie. I did my research project on substance abuse in military service members and veterans. I feel closely related to this topic due to the fact that my dad is a veteran and he has also um, struggled with substance abuse following deployment and his time in the military. So being able to learn about this and get more insight and education on it has been very educational for me. So let me share my screen here. So um, from service to substance abuse, like it says, every year thousands of men and women enlist in the military. They fight for us, they fight for our freedoms. But unfortunately, when they come home, they are not taken care of in the way that veterans deserve to be taken care of. And they experience a plethora of negative side effects from that. The one that we're going to focus on is substance abuse. And so I found this video. Um, I it is 10 minutes long, but I feel like it encompasses everything that my research was about. It's a story about a gentleman who was in the military. Um, he was injured, he was out of the military, his attempt to access benefits, the result of that, and then how ultimately he ended up with a substance abuse issue, and what he did to kind of help himself work through that. So we are going to watch this video. Um, 1 second. Okay, here we go.
Each year, thousands of men and women enlist in our military to fight our enemies and protect our freedoms. But when they come home, these heroes face an enemy that's become all too common for veterans: substance abuse. Richard's time in the Navy was short, but the military's impact has been life-altering.
Then when I got my first orders, I had an accident boarding the first ship that I was on, and I injured my leg and I hit my head. And then on the second ship, I did the same thing. And on the second time I fell, they told me that my leg was to the point that I would have to have 6 months of physical therapy. And they wrote in my report that I was, at that point, undeplorable. And at that point, I was stationed at the Naval Air Station in Norfolk, Virginia, is where was diagnosed with a bleeding subhematoma. I was in the hospital for quite a while. They had called my father and told him he didn't think I was going to make it. But by the grace of God, I survived, and they sent me on leave. And 2 days after me being on leave, I was in a major car accident where I damaged my left arm really bad and got nerve damage.
Richard was discharged and told he needed to follow up with the VA for his medical issues, but his discharge did not qualify him for benefits.
I got out, I didn't have any benefits with the VA. I didn't have any physical therapy for my left arm. I had no follow-ups.
That's when Richard turned to alcohol.
So I just learned to live with my disabilities, and the way I coped with it was drinking. And, I drank for like 30 years. That was my go-to for, like when I was having the headaches, and I was telling them while I was in the service, hey, I got these headaches, and they would just give me basically, I guess, Motrin, which wasn't helping with the headaches. So the alcohol would help relieve the pain.
Was there a moment whenever you were in the midst of this dark time that you thought, okay, now I need to go get help and I can't do it by myself?
Yeah, that was in 2019 when I was talking with that representative from the Workforce Solution. When he saw the signs, he said, yeah, you need to get tested. And I believe on a couple of the questions that they asked you for the PTSD deal, we didn't get past the third question before I ended up going to Baylor Neurology for them to do an assessment on me to see, exactly what was going on. And with their report is where I have multiple cases of depression, anxiety.
Richard was diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder.
One of my friends and former boss used to always say that I wasn't getting the proper care that I needed. And once I found out about the issues that I got from the military, it made sense, and I haven't had a drink since.
The road to recovery hasn't been easy.
For the longest, everybody thought I was just an old alcoholic, but it wasn't that. It was me medicating myself. I was in a drug and alcohol class at the VA because I went through mental health into this substance abuse training program. And in my group, one of the guys was an officer, and I was explaining how, when I first came back, how detrimental it was for me to I had to have my drink, and I would pull up on police officers, and even though I knew my directions where I was going, I would ask them for directions. And the instructor asked the other person that was in the class, that was the police officer at one time, he asked him, he said, "What do you think about his behavior at that time?" And he told him he would see me as a suicidal by cop.
Richard's story is far too common for members of our military. A 2017 study found veterans were more likely to report heavy use of alcohol compared to non-veterans. According to the Department of Veterans Affairs, in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, about 1 in 10 returning veterans seen by the VA have a problem with alcohol or other drugs. Oftentimes, veterans and active duty personnel do not seek help.
The individuals who end up with the substance use disorder usually don't know that that's the path they're headed down until later on. Their buddies aren't drinking as much, but they still are. And so, and then of course, if they go through war or develop PTSD-like symptoms and stuff, it causes more problems. My brother is, he was a 24-year Air Force veteran. And he served through Afghanistan and all that. And one of the things that I noticed with him was he said there was a lot of fear in going to anybody of rank to let them know what was going on. And so he saw friends getting dishonorably discharged from the military because they weren't coming forward.
At first, I used to feel like I didn't want that label on me, but when I look at then and now, I'm thankful that I can say that I went through those experiences, and without God, I wouldn't have made it through a lot of things. And if you want to change, you can. All you have to do is reach out and ask, and somebody will be there to help you.
Without the support of his family and friends, Richard says he wouldn't be where he is today.
They see the times that I was sober, the good person. They knew the good person before I went into the military. And I have a sister, my older sister, and when she found out, she works for the VA, she's an occupational therapist. And when she found out that I had that bleeding subhematoma, she immediately changed her thoughts. She's like, "Richard, I never knew that you had a brain injury." She said, "If I had known when you came home, we would have worked on that right then and there." And I mean, that's, within itself, it hurt her heart to know that I was going through some really, really hard times, physically and mentally. and did nobody know exactly, how to help me.
If you believe a loved one has a problem, Grady says it's important to be kind and understanding.
I call it planting a seed. And sometimes it's just something to say, is there something going on? I've noticed that, you've been drinking a little bit more, or I'm a little concerned because I've noticed that you're spending a lot of time outside smoking weed. Not being in here with our kids. Is there something going on I can help you with? And most of the time, people with substance use disorders are going to blow it off, and they're going to deny that they have a problem, and then you leave it. As a family member, you got to walk away from it and leave it for a minute. And that, it just gets the person thinking about it, and thinking, am I drinking too much? Am I using too much? Because they probably already thought it themselves. I think a lot of people get hung up on that idea that if you don't want to drink, just don't drink. And I've witnessed it from a lot of people that, I care about, who have said things like that. And so understanding that these individuals, if they could make the decision not to drink or to use when it's causing problems in their life, they would.
Despite the dark times, there is light on the other side.
Life is getting better. I'm thankful for all that I have and thankful for the things that I've gone through. And, I'm happy to have a lot of the people that are in my corner right now. Instead of looking at negative things, I can take the negative things and look at and find the positive out of it. I'm learning how to be more patient with people and situations.
Through everything, all Richard wants to see is change.
I know there's millions of veterans out there that's not receiving the help that they deserve. I just pray that the system in itself would change and help those, who are suffering.
Sydney Eisenberg, 25 News.
With a summer heat wave in
So, so that talks a lot about the process and the struggles that he faced when returning from war. The unfortunate part is that veterans who are not honorably discharged do not have access to services. If they're dishonorably discharged, medically discharged, anything like that, you cannot gain VA benefits unless you are honorably discharged from the military. So moving forward with that, we'll discuss just a little bit more. So prevalence rates overall. So there are about 25 million veterans in the United States. According to this article, about 11% of them have some sort of substance abuse issue, whether that's alcohol or drugs. Within that, 68% of overdose deaths in the military involve prescription medication. And that's not necessarily, as you can see, only 48% of those prescription meds were actually prescribed by a doctor. The other percentage is street drugs or prescription medications that individuals are selling on the street that normally you wouldn't have access to unless you were medically prescribed it. And the last statistic there, only 0.8% of individuals that were dealing with a substance abuse disorder are receiving specialty treatment for said substance abuse disorder. So it's definitely a very large problem. However, it doesn't get the recognition and it doesn't get the treatment that it needs. So as far as demographics go, in regards to females, the female population makes up about 50% of the military force now, which is astronomical compared to what it used to be. There was a study done about access to services. 30% of the female population that was interviewed were totally unaware that they had the ability to access services after deployment and after discharge. Along with that, women veterans that had PTSD symptoms were 40% more likely to screen positive for high-risk drinking, drug abuse, and all of that kind of stuff. So I chose to focus on females, and then also homelessness, because the female population and the homeless population are two really big demographics in the military, and tend to struggle just a bit more than everybody else. So as far as homelessness goes, obviously poverty and social inequality, when those things are present in a community, there's obviously differences, and it can definitely increase vulnerability in regards to overdose. And for some of that, a lot of it relates to fear, and living in those lower income communities, maybe the crime rates are higher. There are veterans and military personnel that are scared to call 911 because they are afraid that they will be arrested when they're not calling or not even committing a crime. They just need help. And so a lot of people go without help for that reason. That also goes along the traumas that people go through when serving in war are a lot to deal with in its own. And then, when a service member comes home and they have to deal with impoverished communities, there's no social services, they can't get jobs, they don't have housing. A lot of times people will just find the means to just numb all of those feelings, which is what leads to the substance abuse problems. Because they just don't want to feel the pain anymore, and they do what they can to fix that. The homelessness kind of goes along as well with the risk factors. So I chose two main ones to focus on as far as living circumstances go. So the difference between living in a rural area and an urban area. Obviously, distance and socioeconomic differences affect the ability to obtain services. Typically, this relates to like transportation and location. So veterans in more rural areas likely don't have an area where or a building where services are available, and so they would have to travel farther. These veterans may be disabled, they may not have transportation, and so those are barriers to accessing those services, which then, if you live in a rural area, that's more of a risk factor to have the substance abuse issues. The other risk factor is in access to benefits. So I'm not sure if anybody is aware, but accessing benefits through the VA is like one of the hardest things that you can do. People have reported lost paperwork, poor organization, not being able to schedule appointments. I mean, just a plethora of issues within the VA health system. And so unfortunately, it leads people to feel like the VA doesn't want to help them and doesn't want them to utilize the benefits that they deserve. And so for veterans who also have mental health and substance use disorders, they fear a stigma from reaching out to get help for their mental health and substance use. They feel like the substance use is going to affect their it will make them lose their benefits. But that's not necessarily the case. That's just unfortunately the stigma that surrounds it. So as far as prevention and treatment goes, there are 3 main ones that I decided to focus on. The first one, and probably the biggest one, is telehealth. So currently the department or the VA is attempting to create telehealth interventions for many disorders, not just substance abuse. And so that is something that they're working on. The benefits of telehealth are helpful for those individuals that are living in rural communities who don't have access to the transportation. The VA will actually provide the laptops and internet for the service members and veterans in their own home if they do not have their own personal computers or internet. So that's telehealth. The continuing care piece, sometimes when veterans are diagnosed with a substance use disorder, it is due to an injury that they received and medication that they were prescribed. So typically for pain medications, you're prescribed an opioid. And if there is no continuing care or follow-up care after discharge, it is very likely that an addiction problem will occur. Your body becomes dependent on it, and you can't work without it. And so people will just continue to take the medication. They don't have follow-up care. So that's what they know, and that's what they do. And unfortunately, it leads to a substance use disorder. And so the VA does have a wide range of continuing care options and programs. But there was a study done that said that it's not that the programs aren't there and accessible, it's that they're not effective, and that the quality of the programs need to be better. So unfortunately, that is something that the VA is working on, higher quality of program, but even just getting in with a primary care that's maybe not with the VA, but that can help follow up med management and stuff like that, that would even be beneficial. The other one that I found very interesting was self-governed recovery homes. So there's a group of houses, they're called Oxford houses, and they assist. It's a home where up to 6 veterans can live in the home together. There's no staff, there's no curfews or anything like that, and there's no duration as to how long you can live there. But basically, the veterans rely on each other and they work with each other to help them work through their addiction and not relapse again. And so a study found that, when it was compared to traditional recovery environments, they showed significant better outcomes for substance use, so no longer using employment, and then also staying out of jail due to the substance abuse. Another large issue within substance abuse is obviously the impact on family members and caregivers. So there have been several studies that show that the severity of a parent's PTSD symptoms is associated with overall child well-being. And the reason that I put that in there is because if an individual struggles with PTSD, it is very likely that they will also have a substance use program or problem. And so I felt like it was important to highlight the PTSD as well. And so with that being said, child abuse and neglect cases have been increasing within military families. Domestic violence and family violence overall also increases when an individual is struggling with PTSD or substance use issues. And the military parents and their spouses, they also report more negative behaviors in the children following deployment. And so another issue